Welcome back to day 3 of our very accelerated journey into the future of cities, our Humanity Design Summit. You know, on the first day we saw that there's a developing science of mindfulness and flourishing that we can add to the canon of urban planning and smart cities, a new design mechanism to guide us. Yesterday, we saw a range of tools and capacities, the arts and sciences at our disposal for what we might sense and build, and our responsibilities when we use such powerful and pervasive tools. Today, we turn to places and potential, the stuff of the built world, how we might engage citizens in the creation of their cities, and how we put these together, how we imagine the blank canvases of greenfield cities, or how we might imagine all of our cities and neighborhoods as frontiers for what's to come in a flourishing city. That's what we're doing. And that's why we came here, to India Basin, 40 acres just south of San Francisco, full of potential and ready for development. You know, like so many places, this has an industrial past. It was part of a mighty shipyard complex that was San Francisco, that was an arsenal of democracy 80 years ago. After World War II and the demise of urban heavy industry, this became a poster child for urban neglect and blight, what we ignore in cities. But we're here because this patch of land is a microcosm for today's places and potential. Just south of San Francisco, this might be the next gleaming smart city inspired by Singapore. And today, we'll hear from David Tam, who leads redevelopment in Singapore. That might be one approach for this place south of San Francisco. Or this might be the frontier of resilience, because whatever we plan here, we're on lowland. So whatever happens, it better happen a few meters higher because of climate change or sea rise. What could we learn from 100 other cities planning for tomorrow? Well, today, we'll hear from Laura Sorkin, who leads the Resilient Community Cities Network. There is going to be no greater resource for us for collaboration and planning for the future. Or perhaps this city will learn from non-urban places about how to incorporate agriculture, circular economies, and regeneration. Might this become a community that consumes what it builds, that keeps wealth within its system and is less abstractive? James Ehrlich from the Regen Villages will show us how those ideas are becoming real. But here, this is also near Hunters Point, an African-American neighborhood where hip-hop is the culture. We'll hear from Michael Ford, the hip-hop architect, about how that music form both expresses a reaction to urban space and can be used to train a new generation, an inclusive generation of architects to build better communities. Perhaps this community will participate in its own design as never before. What incredible possibilities and tools we have to make our flourishing future. And one more thing. You know, living as we do in this era of smart cities, of ubiquitous sensing, of machine learning, we can, perhaps for the first time ever, not only appreciate the city as a complex, dynamic system, but build generative learning and simulation into our policies and see how a city will respond. Even play with the city in some collaborative simulation, and then perhaps even have those systems create dynamic regulation, dynamic algorithmic zoning, so we can achieve the flourishing we want in real time by tweaking how cities behave, their regulations, their zoning, their use of space, as they're doing here at the MIT City Science Lab. Here we are, south of San Francisco, on a slab of land about to become something, as so many places are about to become something next. We want to dive into those possibilities with our collective smarts and aspirations, because this place, all of our cities, is where we'll spend the rest of our lives.
Welcome everyone to day 3 of the AudaCities Summit. And with my section, I want to just challenge your ideas about places and what that means. So the line between digital and physical is already gone. There is one world, and both digital and physical exist within it. By not accepting that they are intertwined, it keeps us from bringing good design into the gap. It allows the digital to overpower, and it doesn't help us make the real better without technology. This is the Unreal Engine 3. This engine is the beginning of the metaverse. Everything that's built on it will be interoperable. And so this shared world where we move seamlessly from digital and physical is coming very quickly. But today, most designers are great at physical or they're great at digital, but really the future is going to be about people moving seamlessly between the two based on what it is they're trying to accomplish. So as you consider places and potential, please think about this. And with that, I want to introduce you to your guide for places and potential, my dear friend, Duleesha Kulasooriya. Duleesha is the executive director at the Deloitte Center for the Edge for all of Asia Pac. And the Center for the Edge, their purpose is to look at the edge of what's coming, not the fringe, but the edge. So it's the things that are immediately on their way. And he's going to be your guide for places and potential. And you're going to have a fantastic time. Thank you again for coming.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Nichol, for that introduction. It's great to be here, day 3 of our AudaCities gathering. Today, we're going to talk about places and potential. I'm with a group called Center for the Edge, and we call it Center for the Edge because we believe that all disruptions emerge from the edge. We honor the edge. And one of these edges that I was obsessing about for many years was the maker movement. The DIY, make it by yourself kind of thing that was becoming big over the last decade. That's some of how Mickey and myself and Peter started working together on. And we wrote a couple of books on the maker movement. We ended up getting it into the White House, helped accelerate that movement. And I built myself as a maker myself. This was one of the projects I did. I bought an old school bus, converted it into a tiny home. Did that very much with my community over there in San Francisco. But where it came around to cities was a project we did with the city of Pittsburgh. And this was funded by the Mellon Foundation. And we went in to look to see how could you make Pittsburgh a maker city. And in that context, we started off by saying, how do we entice more makers to come to Pittsburgh? But where we ended up was what was much more important was the maker mindset. At a city scale, how could you get the citizens, the population of the city, to think like a maker? The agency that they can change the environment, the sense of ownership, the sense that failures are not setbacks, but just learnings. That was a big part that came, and that was what really got me excited about maker cities. The tagline we ended up with was from smart city to maker city, how do we make our cities more human again? That anchor that cities are really human things. And that was really brought up in day 1 and day 2 as well. Next, Burning Man. For some of us, this is a beloved space that we converge in once a year. 70,000 people come into the blank desert in Nevada, and they built a city where everything is possible, right? And this is a slide from a presentation I did a while ago. But the key here is participation. There's a collaborative nature of everything coming together in a loosely coupled manner. But this is pretty ephemeral, right? It's play, but it's also not as real for the sort of problems we're dealing with now. Where this came together in a very mashable manner was when the city of San Francisco pulled together, they did a thing called Market Street prototyping, where they brought in a lot of artists, a lot of them from this Maker Fair, to come in and build things to increase civic engagement. And the biggest thing they did here was measurement. Not only did they build things to show participation, but they showed how they actually measured the outcome of this. Now, this is a critical part here because we talked in day 1 and day 2 both about science and the measurement, the experimentation, not just going with intuition, how do you take beyond that? So this is a really interesting experiment around that. Now, all of these talk to the places side of places and potential. What about the potential side? On the potential side, another obsession we've had around the edge is around transformative technologies and the idea of human potential. So we wrote a paper called Unlocking Human Potential, and this was looking at the individual and saying, what practices would an individual need in these very kind of stressful, constantly evolving times. And there are three practices around, mega practices around roots, and three mega practices on shoots. We use the analogy of a tree that you need roots and shoots both to unlearn and relearn. And that's how you kind of discover your purpose and passion. This is how I reconnected with Nichol. Nichol and I have known each other for a few decades, but we reconnected because transformative tech was the tip of the edge here in terms of how you could actually enable your roots and shoots as an individual. And over the next few years, Nichol and I worked together to say, how do you take this human potential idea and transformative tech and take it to businesses, to corporations, to the workspace? And we last year, we launched a thing called One Whole Team, where we would think about redefining work, redefining the work environment, redefining the workforce in such a way that corporations can enable humans to live up to their full potential. What could be bigger than a corporation? Cities. So Nichol started working with Tyson and Shane and team and obsessing about how do you take the human potential and the transformative tech idea to cities. And that is part of what AudaCities is all about. And that is what makes me really excited about being part of this journey as well. One last thing, a shout out to another project we've been supporting in Singapore. It's with the Singapore Design Council, and the people who are running the project are actually in this cohort. So hopefully you do get to see them or meet them over the rest of this, or you got to meet them, or you will meet them today. It's how do you make Singapore a lovable city? Going from a livable city, which is very efficient, to a lovable city. Again, the human aspects of what's lovable. The idea of agency and connection and potential and flourishing, right? So this is an ongoing project that you're doing. So that was my journey. And I'm sure each of you have your own journey as to why you're keen on this project as well. Let's now talk about a few others who've also been deep thinkers about cities and dedicated their lives to it, and where we could take it beyond that. We talked about the idea of it being really human. Ehrlich talked about, like, you build a place with intention, but what makes it come alive is the people in it. So you can't talk about cities without talking about Jane Jacobs. She really talked about the ground up need. And this quote is a very interesting one, where she says, cities have the capability of providing something for everybody only because and only when they're created by everybody. So the importance of being ground up. She studied how it worked at the ground level. And she also brought this concept of cacophony, that it isn't about being clean, orderly, efficient, that there was life in the messiness and the cacophony and the serendipity of all of this coming together. One last one, the human potential. Now here's Richard Florida, who's talking about attracting the creative class, and that the cities that attract the quote unquote creative class are the ones that are really going to build out and grow and become thriving. Now, there's a lot of good in this. In the last few decades, you saw a lot of cities jumping in on this, creating this, but it also had the side effects of hipsterization and gentrification, and pushing out some of the older residents of the cities and not taking care of anyone. So there are many others we could go into, but these are good provocations that we can think about as we think, how would we as a collective, as AudaCities, move this forward? What do we think about? And one provocation here is to rethink where the growth of cities are going to come from. Now, a lot of when we think of cities, might think of the big ones, New York, LA, Shanghai, Tokyo, Beijing. What about the burgeoning cities that are growing up, that are going to come out of India, China, Southeast Asia, and Africa, that are much more chaotic than the rest, that have much bigger issues in terms of flooding and inequality and infrastructure? How can we build something for them as well? Because that is where the growth is going to be. So with all of this, I want to bring us back to today. We spent the last 3 days in our little cohorts. We've gotten to know each other. We know there's so much we could bring together if we come together to collaborate on something. So here's what we need to do. We need to converge back together. We want to have a set of testable, collaborative experiments that we could put to test over the 12 to 18 months. We're not going to get there by the end of today, but what we want by today is at least the formulation of these cool ideas, how we could work with, who we could work with. Okay, now, so on to our speakers. We start off today with a very special guest. We're back to our super host, Mickey, to introduce Michael Ford, who's a hip hop architect. Mickey.
Thanks for joining us. You're up to amazing things. Could you tell us a little bit of your background and about the movement you're building, this idea about just architecture?
Yeah, so I am originally from Detroit, Michigan. I'm now based in Madison, Wisconsin. And I received my master's degree in architecture from the University of Detroit. And I've been working as a designer since then, so 2006. So I've been in the profession about 14 years. And what I have a deep interest in is the impacts of architecture and urban planning on end users. And looking at that impact in some unique ways. So this idea of just architecture or the just city is a conversation that's been around for a few decades, but adding a new voice to it, and that's the voice of the community members themselves. And what I've done is I've created this way of using hip hop to talk about architecture.
Yeah, say more about that. I'm not sure everybody would understand how hip hop intersects with architecture.
Yeah, so I call hip hop modernism's post-occupancy evaluation. Right?
What's post-occupancy evaluation, real quick? It's for non-architects?
As a designer or an architect, if you design a hospital, after you finish that hospital, you're going to talk with the doctors, the nurses, the building engineers.
So the people who are going to occupy it,
right?
Did it work?
Exactly. You want to see how successful it is. You may even talk to some of the patients about their experience. And the goal is the next time you build a hospital, it's even better than that one. And what I say about hip hop was born in these modern ideas, these modern utopias for inner cities, right? So the work of Le Corbusier and some of these modernists that are celebrated unintentionally laid the groundwork that would birth hip hop in the Bronx. And what hip hop music is, if you listen to it, it is a unsolicited, unfiltered critique of the environments from which the culture was born.
These are artists who are reacting directly to what they're feeling in these concrete jungles, right? In these places that maybe weren't designed for them or weren't designed for really the people who have to live there.
Yeah, it was this idea that not only, you think about the architecture for most public housing projects. What's interesting, the architecture was designed like a crucifix. If you look at the form from an aerial view, and this is Le Corbusier's idea of architecture as a machine. He believed that people, once they inhabited the space, you can create a better person if the architecture is a machine. And he believed that this crucifix form, along with all the programmatic elements, would create a better working class citizen. Very interesting way that modernists thought, but hip hop tears all that shit up and just says, this was your idea of urban renewal, but here's the reality of urban renewal. So I juxtapose lyrics with statements from what architects and urban planners thought they were going to achieve, and again show what they actually did through hip hop. Right now in the United States, less than 3% of licensed architects are African American, and then less than 0.2% are African American women. So very few of us are responsible for designing and building our communities, which we all know has a profound impact on whether you are successful or not in the long run, right? Our buildings, our spaces either deny or perpetuate injustices. And unfortunately, it's not a lot of us who are part of those design efforts. So my goal by using hip hop is to make architecture relevant. And it's not a gimmick. Some people think you will just assign a song and dance to architecture. Now people will flood. No, we're giving people a real challenge to solve some of the systemic issues that are perpetuated by built spaces. And we're allowing them to explore the lyrics of their favorite MCs who have given or provided some provocative solutions to some of the problems. So not only does our music critique, but it also provides a glimpse of solutions. So with that 3%, I'm looking to raise that number by making the profession relevant and giving a direct charge and ultimately a new vernacular for young people coming into the profession. Vernacular.
Well, do you think, I suspect that maybe it's not a cultural thing, like I'm going to be an architect when I grow up, or maybe it's not anything they even think, they don't see anybody that looks like them. If it's only 3% or 0.2% women, it helps to have somebody you can aspire to be. Where's the hero? Where's the thing? And how do we get a whole generation, really? And it seems like that's your movement. We've quit your day job. You're like taking a serious stand, and And you're saying, look, these shouldn't be backdrops or sets for injustice, which frankly, like every single moment of the day right now, it feels like they are. You know, I look at the stadiums and the other things being used for bad things.
Totally agree. Yeah, as a profession, we can't be complacent with, designing those backdrops of injustice. And we have to think of architecture as something beyond bricks and mortar, and that's what the Just City is. It's looking at design beyond bricks and mortar. But what are the policies, the laws that are housed within our spaces?
What's happening in August? What's going on with your next step in terms of building a movement, a hip hop architecture movement?
Yeah, so we conduct hip hop architecture camps around the country. We've actually done a few internationally as well, which is usually a face-to-face program. But with challenges we're facing right now with COVID, we switched to a digital platform. So August 1st, we're conducting a hip hop architecture camp for 1,500 young people across the United States, where we're going to tackle some of the very issues that we've been discussing. How does their community look now? Why does it look that way? What has their music said about the neighborhood? And then now let's solve it. Let's solve any issues that have been rapped about or that you have observed. And then let's make a new song. Now that the solution is there, our young people make their own music, which looks towards the future, which is another amazing thing about architecture education. You are convinced that you can see something that no one else can see. You are imagining the future, space and place. You are imagining and getting people to buy into your imagination of the future. You're getting people to understand scale, material.
You've got to communicate that vision through story, which also feels like very relevant to artists and rappers and hip hop artists and others, that they're telling stories. Like, we remember stories, we don't remember facts.
At every single program, no matter what city we're in, there's new conversations that are being discussed. As each region in the United States has a different style of hip hop, if you will, and they have different artists that young people are associated with, and they have unique stories and problems that they're responding to in their music. With Lupe, I mean, he started to describe project buildings, and he has a song called Daydreaming, and he gave the backstory about daydreaming, about buildings in the city of Chicago. He told some stories about his dad telling him that if you put all the buildings together in downtown Chicago, they'll become a robot. He said he never forgot this, and he has a song called Daydreaming where he reimagines a housing project building as a robot, and he describes each one of the joints of this walking robot with all of the injustices that people face in housing projects. So it's very poetic, and again, he's providing these foundational pieces for people that are architects, engineers, urban planners to pick up and use as information for designing a just city.
You had a provocation, clearly your focus, and I think rightly so, is in your location and your place and your culture. The African-American community and the needs that we have right now are just significant if we're gonna make this experiment called America work. And it's being challenged for good reasons, just structural violence and structural racism. What would you say to the global audience, who it may not be the same marginalization or oppression or unjust spaces, but I suspect people are grappling with this all over the world. What would you say to them? How might they think differently about their own communities that they're building, their own cities that they're building in other parts of the world?
Again, hip hop has been defined as a voice of the voiceless, and no matter where hip hop is, it always represents that community and the voices within those communities. So similar to our music here in the U.S., I challenge people all across the globe to listen to the music. Don't just listen to what's happening here in the U.S. Yes, we have some international superstars. Well, listen to what the people in your communities are talking about, because again, they're critiquing.
They're expressing it. Yeah.
So I know that may not have been the most earth-shattering challenge, but again, it's something that I don't think we've done as architects, planners, builders, really listening to what our young people are. We create places for them to share information. So we have these town halls and these formal meeting spaces where we want them to articulate themselves in certain manners. I say hip hop will give you probably every answer that you want, and you don't have to worry about somebody being politically correct with other folks sitting around them critiquing what they say or how they say it.
Michael, thank you so much. This has been Yeah, just a lot of things to take in, and really exciting just to see what you're doing, and the fact that you're kind of redirecting yourself to focus on this full time.
What an excellent combination of Eminem, Mickey, and Michael, and what an inspirational talk, coming deep from kind of inner city. Now we're going from inner city all the way as far as you can go to village. And to talk about regenerative villages and sustainable villages, we have James Ehrlich, who is the founder of Regen Villages. James is also on the faculty of Stanford. He's on the faculty of Singularity University. He's got a long list of great accolades. And he's going to talk about regenerative villages. James?
Thank you so much, Duleesha. I really appreciate it. It's a deep honor for me to be participating. So I'm originally from New York City, born and raised. I moved out to Northern California to start a software company with a group of friends in the early 1990s. And I was surrounded by these beautiful, organic, biodynamic family farms up in Northern California. And I was learning a lot about the work of Rudolf Steiner and Buckminster Fuller, and this idea of whole system, small plot family farms, which is all about symbiosis in nature. And also the work coming out of both Australia and France on the idea of what's called permaculture or permanent culture, dealing with food forests and berms and guilds, and this whole beautiful concept of these entire ecosystems working together in a very low maintenance way for humans, but high abundant nutritional value. That really led me to this case study research on organic farms and farm to table communities. I was really, really interested in this idea of how neighborhoods are actually feeling better, feeling healthier, flourishing, if you will, around this abundant surplus of organic, delicious food at the doorstep. And that led to filming a popular television cooking show, which I produced and directed, which was called Organic Living. And the stories were more than about just the organic food and the farms. It was also about these technologies and these pieces in full integration with each other that were basically allowing us to look at how these communities could essentially be decentralized, off-grid, and healthy and safe. And I was really inspired by this. And when I came to Stanford University in 2012, I got involved with something called the Solar Decathlon, which was a competition of who could build the most energy positive home. I was brought in as the organic food circular system researcher and lecturer to the team, the cohort, starting in 2012. And about 5 minutes into my research, I realized that the smart house inside of the dumb neighborhood doesn't make much sense. And so I was really thinking about this idea of quite a lot, about a software stack, a connection between technology and nature. And I was deeply impacted by the work of Dr. Suzanne Simard from the University of British Columbia, who had come up with this term called the Wood Wide Web, as opposed to the World Wide Web, when she had discovered this, essentially this Ethernet network under the forest floor, this fibrous mycorrhizal mycelial network that's a have-need collaborative economy. It's actually a long-term ledger. Her research proved that old growth Douglas fir trees were conveying nutrients, minerals, carbon, sugar, all kinds of goodies to these maple seedlings, different species trees, hundreds of meters away in the forest floor. And why would that be? Well, because the forest agreed that that maple tree should come to maturity, because eventually someday it will have something delicious to give back to the community. I think it's quite a beautiful metaphor, I hope, for the future of a human economic long-term ledgers in relationship, especially to nature. So at Stanford, studying biomimicry and applying, basically mimicking nature to design thinking, we look at the fact that 30% of our DNA is actually mycorrhizal. And most recently, about 2 years ago, they discovered at a cosmological scale that galaxies are actually interconnected by these thin fibers of electromagnetic dark matter. And when simulated, it very much looks like a mesh network. Now, a mesh network is very interesting because there's not a single brain. It's actually intelligence at the point of sensing. And from my perspective, this was all the inspiration that I needed in terms of beginning to architect and envision this village operating system software, which we call the Village OS. This is for the first time ever to understand the nutritional flows, food, water, energy, and waste to resource management, full circularity of all these integrated systems at the substrate of the neighborhood in support of these smart house technologies. At the heart of it is what's near and dear to my heart, which is delicious food. So non-till soil, full menu, organic, biodynamic, soil-based farming, which is a predominant kind of spread around the community, but it's a different economic model, hey? It's about this idea of association fees and local community-supported agriculture to feed and support these amazing local farmers. So neighborhood scale, in other words. But also that we can supplement the idea of the soil-based farming with effluent-based farming, so aquaponic, aeroponic systems. And these systems are amazing because they use fish protein and the waste from fish and freshwater shrimp and crawfish to have full circularity. So the waste turns from ammonia to nitrates with a low energy water pump. It's brought to the top of these lattices. The roots dangle in this nutrient-rich water, and the water comes back to the tanks purified. So it's able to save almost 80% water with almost 1/3 increase in yield. So you're starting to get the picture here of neighborhood development around permaculture, soil-based, controlled farming, and what people can grow right next to their apartment or doorstep that really gives you this perspective of abundant surplus of flourishing, organic, delicious ingredients. One of the other big pieces that we've been focusing on is how can we feed the fish, feed the chickens, and look at using food and animal waste as a method for creating essentially this full circularity. And that is using aquatic worms and black soldier fly larvae. Those happens to be the perfect nutritional inputs for the chickens and the fish. And as they digest their own weight every day in food and animal waste, this anaerobic digestion is also the perfect input because it has this capability of becoming nutrient-rich, microbe-filled topsoil. So it is a restorative nutrient generator for spreading back out, even to grayfield and brownfield areas. So this restorative idea, this metabolic integration, you will, of the output of one system becoming the input of another is really the basis of our village operating system software. So the idea really of the smart, sentient neighborhood infrastructure that supports any number of smart homes. The primary goal of our software and how we're designing it right now is that it has two distinct features to it. The first is as a design tool to actually SimCity design a virtual regenerative neighborhood just by providing us with land grant data, what's called GIS or geospatial information. And then the rest can be using artificial intelligence and machine learning to literally simulate a beautiful regenerative neighborhood on pre-existing farmland or ranch land or open space. The second part of it, after designing those communities, is the operating system, basically a farmhouse server that can run and operate using historical data, real-time sensor data, and of course, machine learning predictive modeling for consumption patterns, weather patterns, traffic patterns, any kind of big data that can be essentially crunched by machine learning. Our software will be able to effectively run these communities and make them very beautiful places and easy places for people to live in. Now imagine the full system approach of neighborhoods finally being able to communicate with each other and autonomously improve or mitigate based on their climate zones. And we think that's incredibly exciting for the future of neighborhood developments around the world, that they can use data for the benefit of human flourishing. And it's really not Star Trek. It's about resiliency. It's about connectivity, multi-generational, multicultural, ethnic, socioeconomic level families coming together around the most disarming topic, which is delicious food. And this idea of aging in place, that you're born in a community, you live in a community, and you nurture a full lifespan, a full story arc inside these very lush and beautiful kinds of neighborhoods. As well as this idea of the full symbiosis that creates abundant surplus, and that we live within nature and not separate from it, and that we can actually be celebrating the seasonality. And that's something really, really important that our species has become completely disassociated from. So overarching new kind of greenfield, new build, master plan development around decentralized, self-sustaining neighborhoods. I'm not anti-city. As I mentioned, I grew up in Manhattan. The idea is that we can build these communities, creating very safe places outside of cities, near suburban, peri-urban, and rural, but then bring those pieces back into cities in such a way that a building like this, for instance, a mid-rise residential tower, could actually be made resilient and maybe even self-reliant if it has some adjacency with open space. Regen Villages is the future of living in self-reliant, regenerative, and resilient neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you, James, for showcasing what a beautiful, amazing, sustainable peri-urban village community society could look like. And now we're switching all the way from village back to cities and to Singapore, where we build things at scale. And to talk about that, we have a very special guest, David Tan, who's the assistant CEO of JTC. And he's going to talk about the plans they have for further developments in Singapore. David?
About 12,000 students in a fairly mature estate called Punggol, with about 300,000 people living there. And in future, we will have 28,000 workers being created. One particular development at Punggol Digital District is the Heritage Trail and Campus Boulevard. Here, we try to retain as much of the existing greenery as possible, and we try to design it in a very biophilic way so as to create a conducive environment and hopefully to improve the quality of life of not only the students studying there, the workers working there, as well as the community who wants to enjoy the space. And we also pedestrianize a lot of the roads to create a safer path for people and cyclists. In all our mixed-use districts, we want to develop them as sustainable and as green as possible. And this is the concept where we want to have shared utilities and services. For example, in terms of energy and cooling, we will deploy district cooling systems so as to provide chilled water to the various buildings within the estate, as well as we have a centralized pneumatic waste conveyancing system to bring the waste from the food court, as well as from the various offices and business park spaces to a central location for disposal. We also hope to enhance waste recycling on site, where we will collect all the waste to be recycled, and we are even looking at waste biodigester for food waste so that we actually reduce the amount of waste generated within the estates. Within the estates, we are also looking at smart grid, where we want to balance between the amount of electricity that is generated as well as the amount of electricity that we take from the grid, so as to optimize the energy efficiency of all our developments there. We also want to create collaborative and vibrant districts. And this is where we put in place-making activities as well as to build collaborative communities. We actually organize various programming and place-making activities to bring the companies together, the workers, the students, and the people. And hopefully this will all drive opportunities for the different parties to come together, to come up perhaps with the next generation of ideas to improve the district, as well as to come up with solutions that could help the community, to help businesses. And with all this interaction, we also hope to have lots of friendship being developed within the estates. And finally, in our estates, we want to make them smart as well as predictive. And this is a concept where we will have a centralized district operations center, which will allow the various systems within the estates to be integrated within a single platform for central monitoring, analytics, optimization, and control. We will make data available for companies as well as the community to use, so that they can also develop applications as well as solutions that can be deployed within our districts to be able to solve tomorrow's problem. With such a smart and predictive districts, we hope to reduce the need for human interventions, especially in some of the utilities and the services that we provide, improve user experience, and finally adding time to our lives. We just want to thank you very much for this very short presentation on how we develop smart, sustainable, and livable districts. Thank you very much.
David, thank you for that. You have big plans for upgrading a whole bunch of Singapore. How could the delegates from this gathering support you in your future plans?
Well, as you have heard from my presentation, we hope to develop sustainable, livable, and smart districts within Singapore. And we would like to build collaborative community and build a network of people, companies that can work together with us to achieve our vision. And we look forward to the participants who have ideas can come to see us or discuss with us and see how their ideas can be realized within our district or within Singapore. So we welcome to collaborate.
Thank you, David, for showing us a sliver of the future of Singapore. And now we're going to networks of cities. We have Lauren Sorkin. So we're going from one city to many cities. Lauren, who's the executive director of the Global Resilient Cities Network, is going to talk about how all these cities are connected and how they can learn from each other. Lauren, on to you.
Imagine that you are the mayor of a city of 5 million people. Your city is growing at between 7 and 9% a year. You barely have enough funding and enough city staff to keep the city systems and infrastructure moving. You're headed into a devastating monsoon season where rains could shut down your formal and informal transport network and bring the industry to a halt. This isn't a hypothetical story. This is the story of Surat in India, one of the fastest growing cities not only in India and Asia Pacific, but in the world. Last year, the city of Surat reached out through its membership in the Global Resilient Cities Network to us, and we connected them with the city of Rotterdam. Rotterdam shared with the city of Surat how they, for decades, have been building water plazas within their city, where people can gather and recreate in good times. And in times of heavy rain and flooding, those same water plazas fill up and are flooded, and they become beautiful reservoirs. Instead of being a danger, floods become a place for people to also look at their city, but from the outside. In times of trouble, it's our networks that sustain us. It's when we look to others that we find solutions to our problems and we realize that we are more alike than we are different. This, at its core, is the work of the Global Resilient Cities Network. So let me tell you a little bit more about what we do. The Global Resilient Cities Network helps cities around the world become more resilient to the physical, social, and economic challenges that they face. We are city-led, we are impact-focused, and we work with partners to deliver results in cities around the world. We work in 47 different countries and in 21 different languages. Our network is the product of over 10 years of investment in resilience from the Rockefeller Foundation, and builds on the foundation of the 100 Resilient Cities program, which operated from 2013 to 2019 and innovated the way we think about building resilience in cities. Our organization is comprised of former leaders of 100 Resilient Cities based in London, Singapore, Mexico, and New York. So what is resilience? It's important to understand resilience the way we work on it within Global Resilient Cities Network. We have a common definition that is bold and is broad. We view resilience as the capacity of individuals, communities, institutions, businesses, and systems to survive, adapt, and grow no matter what kind of shock or stress they might be experiencing. Now, when we talk about stresses, we're talking about those issues that might not happen suddenly in a day, but that are slowly burning below the surface. And they're making it more and more difficult for our cities to grow and to be prepared for the future. They include such global challenges as climate change, or very specific challenges to certain geographies and countries like systemic racism. It could be chronic food and water shortage or an aging population. We also deal with acute shocks, which are those sharp events that threaten a city: an earthquake, a flood, a terrorist attack, or a pandemic. Now, what is the opportunity that we work on within the Global Resilient Cities Network? We have, over the course of the last 6 years, built an institutional innovation that allows us to channel solutions to cities on a large scale. Across our network of 100 cities, we have chief resilience officers. These chief resilience officers work as a single point of contact in their cities to look across the cities, across sectors, break down silos, and look at the opportunities and challenges for their cities. They are a top-level advisor to the mayor or governor or city commissioner in their cities, and they coordinate all resilience building efforts. These chief resilience officers have also spent time developing resilience strategies. These resilience strategies have been led by chief resilience officers, endorsed by city leadership, and have taken a holistic view at the city's challenges and opportunities and prioritized those initiatives that are going to propel that city into the future and make them stronger and more resilient to the challenges they face. These cities represent 220 million people worldwide, and they represent city budgets of over $350 billion These cities are invested for the long term. In the words of Lenio Mervilla, our Chief Resilience Officer from Athens, cities are invested for the long term. We cannot not deliver. Now, when we say cities are more alike than they are different, what are we actually talking about? Cities are systems, and they are facing certain shocks and stresses that are common. The most common is rainfall, flooding, and infrastructure failure when we look at our shocks, those things that are happening suddenly. And this will come as no surprise to many of you, when we look at stresses, we look at economic inequality, lack of affordable housing, and inadequate infrastructure like public transportation, excuse me. Now, our cities share that common lens of holistic resilience. This is important because when they are confronting these shocks and stresses, they're not looking at them alone. They're looking at them as part of a system and how they can design solutions that will deliver multiple benefits. This group has a shared vision to create together scalable programs and investments that really work to benefit vulnerable communities and that enhance critical infrastructure systems that serve all citizens in cities. Now, when we look at our cities, what we see is a very exciting potential because we have different groups of cities. Some of them in some of these areas are coping champions. For example, Rotterdam with its flood plazas. Some of our cities are ready to pilot these new innovations. We call those our proving ground cities. And then we have cities, many of them, who are highly vulnerable, who are growing very fast, and who are in need of additional technical assistance and funding in order to scale those solutions and really leap forward in their resilience building efforts. Many of these cities in our network are located in Africa and India. Now, with the onset of COVID-19, we have never had a more profound and universal resilience challenge. So our cities came to us and asked for support. We found through surveys that 89% of our chief resilience officers are either deployed to response or recovery efforts. The minority of those CROs are very focused on individual city efforts like testing or food supply. The majority of chief resilience officers are actually tasked with what does that new normal look like? What is a resilient recovery? And therein lies an enormous opportunity. So we've created a program, C2R, or Cities for a Resilient Recovery, that empowers cities to rise from COVID-19 as thriving and future ready, backed by knowledge, networks, and investments that measurably strengthen them. Through our network, we are providing real-time global communication where cities have a safe space to ask each other for advice and policy solutions that they are able to deploy in real time. We also convene a weekly speaker series on COVID-19, and last night's session actually looked at resilient food systems. We've also expanded our global database that looks at those shocks and stresses to identify the areas that are going to be even more important now that we are in a period of stimulus and potential for transformation as we recover from COVID-19. And we're creating within our network these action cohorts that help to respond in specific areas. Now, as we transition to recovery, this is the resilience opportunity of our generation. We are able to look through a resilience lens at what are those underlying shocks and stresses that made COVID-19 unfold in a certain way in a certain city? What are those cascading effects that we've experienced? What do we know about the kind of city that we want to build proactively? And then that allows us to plan for better projects and better outcomes. Now, knowing that this group has a particular interest in the food space, this is an example of just one of the areas that we work in, which is food systems and resilient food systems. And this shows a basic mapping from within our network of which cities are focused on food resilience and what kinds of projects and programs these cities need in order to build back better. We see that 41% of cities who have completed their resilience strategies have identified food systems as an area for investment. And you can see here within the spectrum, some of these are looking at equity in food, some of these are looking at how do we preserve the environment or invest in sustainable food solutions, and others are actually looking at circular economy. So there are a lot of complementarities here with the agenda for this network. And finally, just one example. So in the city of Chennai, the city also, like Surat, though they're very far apart geographically, also deals with inconsistent monsoon rains. And unfortunately, also has many children who are not able to access healthy food on a regular basis and who count on their schools to provide them with nutritious midday meals. Now, as part of the Chennai Resilience Strategy, we identified urban agriculture as one of the potential ways to solve for capturing rainwater, providing healthy food, and also educating children about their food systems and the importance of cultivating organic and healthy food. And so out of that, the Chennai Urban Horticulture and Rooftop Gardening Initiative was born. And this initiative utilizes thousands of acres of rooftop gardens on city schools. City schools are an asset that cities have control over. So they're able to make this change fairly rapidly. They're also able to involve their local communities. So in 200 different schools, the community welfare associations are coming together to help to maintain these gardens and provide the vegetables from them to the nutritious midday meals program in Tamil Nadu. And then finally, it creates an opportunity to bring citizens together to educate them about the benefits of this rooftop gardening for their own personal health and nutrition, for the environment, for the community. So here we see all of these benefits, these co-benefits, that when we take a holistic resilience approach, we're able to map, we're able to quantify, we're able to realize. And with that, I just want to say thanks. I'm really looking forward to the discussion.
Lauren, that was amazing, and it's so good to hear from you, and thank you for the great work that you do. If there's one project you would like to throw to this group of delegates to take forward and do something with, what would it be?
If I had to pick a theme, I would say we really need to accelerate projects that are strengthening local economy and that are meeting climate challenges and health challenges in a post-COVID environment. And I would say that that is extremely relevant for all of our cities, but the cities who really need the most help are those fast-growing secondary cities. And sitting in Southeast Asia, there are many of them. In our network, the city of Semarang is one that comes to mind that we work very closely with, but it's by no means the only city. And these cities are well organized, but they are not always well resourced. And these cities really can use this kind of a network, right, of innovators, of technologists, of financiers to come in and work with a government who has aligned around what they want and has aligned around a resilience strategy and an agenda, and take innovative projects forward, and also break down this assumption that it's only the New Yorks or the Shanghais that can innovate and that can afford to innovate. That's just simply not true. We know that we have secondary cities in emerging markets who are ready, and it's there that we have the highest potential to have impact, because that's where the growth is, right? That's where cities are growing the fastest, in these secondary cities and emerging markets.
You've done, again, an incredible job with systemizing everything, like taking a very systematic approach to all this. You've taken a great approach to language and getting everyone to understand the language that you use around resilience. So there's a common understanding of all of this. Where would you take that? Is the knowledge captured in one place? How are you extending the knowledge beyond the 47 countries you work with?
So with our network, we have a pretty simple but strict approach to what we do. When we work with cities, as you mentioned, we all adhere to the same definition of resilience, right? We have to take that same bold and broad language, and then we have to ground it. So in management speak, you say, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. In the transformation space, and in particular in this kind of network and resilience space, if you can't articulate it, you can't action it. So we work very closely with our cities to define those metrics, and ultimately our cities measure those and then share them with us, right? Because these are metrics that chief resilience officers are responsible for reporting on. And so, for example, with COVID-19, we saw our chief resilience officer from Oakland was deployed to the Emergency Operations Center in her city. And she ran the city's first community resilience center within that Emergency Operations Center. Now, what did that mean? It meant that when the community, including the private sector, including individual donors, pooled together very quickly $4 million for an Oakland relief fund, that her office was able to advise on which of the specific minority-owned businesses really needed those funds and deploy them in a directional way, so that those entrepreneurs of color, those women entrepreneurs, they would be on the priority list and that they would receive funding sooner. So those are the statistics that our chief resilience officers collect, and then we collect them for the cities globally. If this is a project based on cities, then the sooner cities are involved, the better. Like a resilience strategy looks at the outcomes you want at a city level, and then you deliver along those outcomes, right? So every project that's designed for resilience strategy is outcome oriented, right? So we have to be able to articulate what we're trying to do with this resilience work, and that we are working on cities as systems, and that we are working on this at various levels of engagement, right? So we have to work on it with communities, we have to work on it with the public sector, and we have to work on it with the private sector, right? So we have to get those multiple actors involved, because they all have a role to play, and they have to make sure that the solutions are going to be designed for them. So that's a very specific way that we adhere to that same approach with the network and what we do.
What's next? Where do you want to go with this?
Thanks, Alicia. That's a great question. So it's all about creating collective action at this point. So within those 4,300 projects, there are clusters, right? There are these action areas where cities want to work together. So what we're looking for are partners in financing these clusters, innovators who want to come in and bring in best practices and support cities to do this work. We are able to provide an architecture, right? And we're able to provide a foundation of cities with strategies, with chief resilience officers who understand how to get these projects done in cities. And they are creating a platform to really scale innovation. So we're looking at a couple of different thematic areas. I mentioned food systems, another one is circular economy. We're also looking very closely at climate change adaptation, including water resilience and also urban heat. And then we are also looking with some new partners on energy transition and some other issues around digital transformation, digital economy.
Lauren, thank you so much. That was an amazing showcasing of the great work you've been doing.
Okay, we are coming to the end of a compressed 3 days. And I thought there were some really interesting connecting themes in today's speakers that could help us as we go off to our cohorts and breakouts.
Yeah.
And I think a key one had to do with the kind of distributed nature of everything today. You know, James Ehrlich, when he talked to us about regenerative villages, was really highlighting that we increasingly are moving from mass 20th century structures to local economies, local agriculture, local energy, because it's possible to build things that, you know, are systems that take care of themselves, but those ideas can also happen in cities. It's kind of fractal.
Yeah, they're very, I mean, these, you could see easily each neighborhood converting into this circular thing that he described for villages and peri-urban. Absolutely.
Right, and the idea that, you know, the solution to big problems is lots of little distributed things as opposed to one big thing. And then we heard from Lauren Sorkin with the Resilient Cities Network. And again, this was about lots and lots of cities, because cities themselves are networks, but then cities networking together to solve problems. And interesting, like there's no giant big government in the middle, it's a distributed function.
And that fits in really well with the fractal idea, where each of the default fractal nodes, they connect bigger and bigger into bigger and bigger fractal patterns. So all these city networks looks like the giant fractal pattern, starting with each one individually.
And, you know, there's this kind of broader geopolitical realization that increasingly cities are the decision-making structure, they're the, you know, the leaner acting structure. Nation states are kind of more annoying and just, you know, kind of cities just have to go solve problems, right? As Barbara said, if mayors ruled the world. And when we listen to Michael Ford with hip hop architecture, the amazing insight I got from that was that hip hop was a sensing mechanism, a reaction mechanism to the things that went wrong with urban renewal and mass urban development. That music was a statement of, okay, here's what didn't work. here's what's really bad, and here's what we aspire to. And to me, that said that for all of this smart cities and sensing and stuff we deployed, humans as sensors to pick up what's going on and responding in that most human way. We made a new form of music. That was pretty cool.
Absolutely. It's a good reminder that as we move into more and more technology, and we're talking about how technology can support, that to not forget that the humans are the best sensors that we have.
And, you know, there was so much coded in that, humans as sensors, but also this, okay, at a time when we talk about inclusion and, you know, digital divide, the idea that we can take these communities that normally aren't part of the planning discussion and turn into a great, cool activity, using hip hop as a way, as a lens into the city. The more we include people in the development of the city, the better. And for people who don't have agency or don't normally feel included, if you do it in their language, boy, that's cool. He's onto that. And then finally, David Tan. So if everything else we just talked about was kind of leading edge, early adopter stuff, Singapore represents, you know, scale. That is, there's no more core city than that. But I thought what's interesting about David, who's also Singapore as a partner in this AudaCities and this mistletoe effort, is here's a city that's really curious to all of us who are about to go off into cohorts. How do we bring this flourishing concept forward? What are the pilots we can do? He's at once scaling big things and listening for how new ideas can come in.
Yeah, I'm very excited about that. I mean, part of the reason I moved from San Francisco, where we were, to Singapore was because of their ambition to keep pushing the boundaries and their willingness to bring the outside in. And their partnering in this case is really exciting for us, because I think that gives us one of the vehicles of how the ideas that come from this group could manifest itself into the real world.
So as we go off into our cohorts now, I think key things to remember. One, through the good work of Singapore and Mistletoe, if we're about to come up with ideas and pitch something, there are some really powerful catchers on the other side who want to help develop these ideas. So we are about connecting things up. And by the way, Lawrence Sorkin's network, the 100 Resilient Cities network, created by Rockefeller, that's another incredibly powerful resource. So we have incredible resources, and we have these remarkable newer ideas that people like James and Michael shared with us. Now it's our turn to go off and amplify that, because really the possibility frontier is just beginning.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you so much. We're now going to let everybody go off, and then we shall reconvene in the near future as we go to work on how we connect up these concepts of flourishing to the concepts of smart cities and to the concepts of how we take both the technology and the ideas we've learned about and do something great with them.
you.